A lonely millionaire took his black secretary to a ball. His friends mocked him, until she walked in. The moment Jonathan Whitmore's secretary stepped into that ballroom, every assumption about love, loyalty, and what really matters began to crumble, starting with his own. Jonathan Whitmore had no idea that bringing his secretary to the charity ball would cost him everything he thought he wanted, and give him everything he never knew he needed. Hello, family. Before I dive deep into this story, I have a heartfelt favor to ask. Please subscribe to this channel, and put the notification bell on. And share this story. Your support goes a long way helping us bring these amazing stories to you every day. Remain blessed as you do so. Now let's begin. The crystal chandelier cast rainbow fragments across Jonathan Whitmore's empty penthouse, each shard of light as isolated as the man who owned them all. Jonathan stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city pulse with life 40 stories below. At 38, he possessed everything money could buy. The penthouse overlooking Central Park, the fleet of luxury cars, the private jet, the respect that came with a 9-figure net worth. Yet as he prepared for the annual Whitmore Foundation charity ball, the same hollow ache gnawed at his chest that had plagued him for years. His phone buzzed with the usual parade of messages. "Can't wait to see you tonight, darling," from Vivian Ashworth, whose interest in him correlated directly with his stock portfolio performance. "Looking forward to discussing that merger," from Bradley Chen, who'd never called him by his first name in 15 years of friendship. "Hope you're bringing someone special," from his mother, whose definition of special meant someone with the right pedigree, the right connections, the right bloodline. Jonathan loosened his tie and walked to his home office, where tomorrow's work waited in neat stacks. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd built an empire connecting people through technology, yet he'd never felt more disconnected from humanity. "Mr. Whitmore?" The voice belonged to Zara Johnson, his executive assistant of 3 years. She stood in the doorway holding a tablet, her posture professional but her dark eyes warm with genuine concern. "The car will be here in an hour. Do you need anything else before?" "Actually, yes." The words tumbled out before he could stop them. "I need a favor." Zara stepped into the office, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. She wore a simple navy dress that somehow managed to look both professional and elegant, her natural hair pulled back in a style that framed her face beautifully. Jonathan had always noticed her grace, her intelligence, the way she handled his most difficult clients with a combination of firmness and charm that he envied. "What can I do for you?" Jonathan hesitated. The request forming in his mind was impulsive, possibly inappropriate, definitely outside the bounds of their professional relationship. But as he looked at Zara, really looked at her, he saw something he'd been searching for in all the wrong places. Authenticity. Kindness. A person who saw him as more than a bank account with legs. "Come with me tonight." "To the ball." Zara's eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained composed. "I'm not sure I understand." "As my date." The words hung in the air between them. "I know it's last minute, and I know it's unconventional. But I can't face another evening of people who only see dollar signs when they look at me." For a moment, Zara said nothing. Jonathan watched emotions flicker across her face. Surprise, consideration, something that might have been sympathy. She was 28, brilliant, and had turned down 3 job offers from his competitors in the past year. She could have left for better opportunities, but she'd stayed. He'd never asked himself why. "Mr. Whitmore." "Jonathan." "Please." "Jonathan." His name sounded different in her voice, softer somehow. "Are you sure about this?" "Your usual crowd. They might not understand." The careful way she phrased it told him she understood exactly what she was really asking. His usual crowd was old money, old prejudices, old assumptions about who belonged in their rarefied world. Taking Zara would be more than bringing a date. It would be making a statement he wasn't sure he was prepared to defend. But as he looked at her, standing there with dignity and intelligence radiating from every line of her posture, he realized he was tired of being careful, tired of living his life according to other people's expectations. I've never been more sure of anything. Zara studied his face for a long moment. I don't have anything appropriate to wear to something like this. That's not a problem. There's a boutique downstairs that stays open late for residents. Tell them to put everything on my account. I can't let you. You can and you will. Please. Zara. I'm asking you to do me this favor, and I'm asking you to let me do this for you. Something shifted in her expression, a wall coming down just slightly. Why me? The question was simple, but the answer was complex. Because when she brought him coffee, she remembered he liked it black with just a hint of cinnamon. Because she'd worked late with him during the Henderson acquisition and had made him laugh for the first time in months. Because when his father had died last year, she'd simply placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "I'm sorry for your loss." And somehow that had meant more than all the elaborate flower arrangements and sympathy cards combined. Because you're the only person in my life who sees me as Jonathan, not as Whitmore Industries. Zara was quiet for so long he thought she might refuse. Then she nodded, just once. I'll need 2 hours. Take 3. After she left, Jonathan stood alone in his office, wondering what he'd just set in motion. Through his windows, the city sparkled with promise and possibility. For the first time in years, he felt something other than emptiness when he looked at those lights. He had no idea that in a few hours, everything he thought he knew about himself, about his world, and about what mattered would change forever. What assumptions do we make about people based on their position in our lives, and how might those assumptions blind us to who they really are? Share with us your thoughts in the comments below. The Whitmore Foundation Charity Ball transformed the Metropolitan Museum's Great Hall into a glittering constellation of New York's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, while a string quartet played softly near towering arrangements of white orchids and roses. The air hummed with the particular energy of people who moved the world with their checkbooks and connections. Jonathan adjusted his bow tie for the 3rd time as he waited in the museum's marble foyer. The familiar faces swirled around him, the Ashworths, the Pemberton family, tech moguls and oil heiresses, politicians and philanthropists. His world. His cage. Jonathan! Vivian Ashworth glided toward him in a silver gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. Darling, you look absolutely devastating. Where's your mysterious date? Mother said you were bringing someone special. Before he could answer, Bradley Chen appeared at his elbow with 2 other men Jonathan recognized from various boards and country clubs. Whitmore! We were just discussing the Henderson merger. Brilliant move, by the way. Though I heard you had some help from that assistant of yours. What's her name again? Zara Johnson, Jonathan said carefully. Right. Smart girl. For someone in her position. Bradley's tone carried the casual dismissiveness that made Jonathan's jaw tighten. Speaking of which, where is your date tonight? Don't tell me you're flying solo again. Jonathan opened his mouth to respond when the conversation around them began to fade. A ripple of silence moved through the foyer like a stone dropped in still water. He turned toward the museum's entrance and felt his breath catch. Zara stood at the top of the marble steps, and she was magnificent. She wore a deep emerald gown that seemed to have been crafted specifically for her, elegant without being ostentatious, sophisticated without trying too hard. The color brought out the warm undertones in her dark skin and made her eyes luminous. Her hair was styled in an updo that showcased the graceful line of her neck, and she wore simple diamond earrings that caught the light as she moved. But it wasn't the dress or the jewelry that made every conversation pause. It was the way she carried herself, with a quiet confidence that commanded attention without demanding it. She descended the steps with the poise of someone who belonged exactly where she was, her chin lifted just enough to meet every stare with dignity. Jonathan felt something shift in his chest, a recognition so profound it was almost physical. This was what he'd been searching for without knowing it, not just beauty, but presence. Not just elegance, but authenticity wrapped in grace. My God, someone whispered behind him. Who is that? Zara's eyes found his across the crowded foyer, and she smiled. Not the practiced smile of someone playing a role, but something genuine and warm that seemed meant only for him. Jonathan moved toward her as if pulled by gravity, barely aware of the whispers that followed in his wake. "You look." He began when he reached her, then stopped. Words felt inadequate. "Thank you." Her voice was soft, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of vulnerability beneath the confidence. "I wasn't sure about the dress." "It's perfect." "You're perfect." The words hung between them, more honest than he'd intended. For a moment, the museum full of people faded away, and there was only Zara, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Jonathan." She said his name like a question, like a discovery. "Yes. Thank you. For asking me. For." She gestured slightly, encompassing the dress, the evening, the leap of faith they were both taking. "For seeing me." Before he could respond, the spell was broken by a familiar laugh. Vivian Ashworth appeared beside them, her smile sharp as cut glass. "Well, well. Jonathan, aren't you going to introduce us to your friend?" The pause before friend was deliberate, loaded with implication. Jonathan felt Zara stiffen almost imperceptibly beside him, but her expression remained serene. "Vivian, I'd like you to meet Zara Johnson." "Zara, this is Vivian Ashworth." "How lovely to meet you," Vivian said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "And what do you do, dear?" "I'm an executive assistant," Zara replied evenly. "How interesting." Vivian's eyes flicked to Jonathan with barely concealed amusement. "And where did you two meet?" "Zara works with me," Jonathan said, his voice carrying a warning that Vivian either didn't hear or chose to ignore. "Oh!" Vivian's laugh was like breaking glass. "How wonderfully modern of you, Jonathan. Bringing the help to the ball. How very democratic." The words hit like a slap. Jonathan felt his face flush with anger, but before he could speak, Zara placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's quite all right," she said, her voice steady. "I'm sure Mrs. Ashworth didn't mean anything by it." But her eyes, when they met Vivian's, held a quiet steel that made the older woman take a small step back. "Of course not," Vivian said quickly. "I just meant, well, it's so refreshing to see someone willing to step outside their usual social circle." "Yes," Zara said softly. "It is." The simple agreement somehow managed to sound like both forgiveness and a challenge. Jonathan stared at her, amazed by her grace under fire, by the way she'd turned Vivian's cruelty into something that reflected poorly only on its source. As Vivian excused herself with obvious discomfort, Jonathan leaned closer to Zara. "I'm sorry. I should have." "You should have what?" "Predicted that some people would be small-minded." Zara shook her head. "This is your world, Jonathan. But it doesn't have to define you." Looking into her eyes, Jonathan realized she was right. And more than that, he realized he was falling in love with a woman who was stronger, wiser, and more graceful than anyone in this room full of supposed sophisticates. The evening had only just begun, but already everything had changed. The ballroom buzzed with barely contained whispers as Jonathan led Zara through the crowd. He could feel the weight of every stare, hear the subtle shift in conversations as they passed. What had seemed like courage in the foyer now felt like walking through a minefield. "The Pemberton table is just ahead," he murmured, his hand resting lightly on the small of Zara's back. The simple contact sent warmth through him, but he could feel the tension in her posture. "Jonathan, perhaps we should—" Zara began, but her words were cut off by a booming voice. "Whitmore! There you are!" Charles Pemberton III approached with his wife Margaret in tow, both wearing expressions of barely concealed curiosity. "We've been dying to meet your mysterious companion." Jonathan performed the introductions with growing unease. The Pembertons were old family friends, people he'd known since childhood, but their smiles felt strained as they shook Zara's hand. "Zara Johnson," Margaret repeated slowly, as if testing the name. "And you work for Jonathan?" "With Jonathan," Zara corrected gently. But Jonathan caught the slight emphasis. "How progressive," Charles said, his tone suggesting it was anything but a compliment. "Though I suppose in today's climate, one must be seen to be inclusive." The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jonathan felt his jaw clench, but before he could respond, Zara spoke. "Inclusion suggests someone being allowed in from the outside," she said, her voice pleasant but firm. "I prefer to think of it as recognition, seeing value that was always there." Margaret's laugh was brittle. "How philosophical. Jonathan, you didn't mention your assistant was so articulate." "Executive assistant," Jonathan corrected sharply. "And Zara has an MBA from Wharton and speaks 4 languages. Her articulation shouldn't surprise anyone." The revelation clearly did surprise the Pembertons, but rather than looking impressed, they seemed almost offended, as if Zara's qualifications were somehow inappropriate. "Well," Charles said after an uncomfortable pause, "shall we find our table?" As they moved toward their assigned seats, Jonathan noticed how conversations quieted when they approached, then resumed in urgent whispers after they passed. Bradley Chen caught his eye from across the room and shook his head with what looked like pity. Vivian Ashworth was holding court near the bar, her animated gestures suggesting she was sharing the evening's gossip with relish. At their table, the introductions continued with the same undercurrent of tension. The Weatherbys, old money from Boston. The Sinclair family, tech royalty from Silicon Valley. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a renowned surgeon and longtime family friend. Each greeting felt like a small test that Zara passed with grace while Jonathan grew increasingly uncomfortable with his friend's behavior. "So, Zara," Dr. Hoffman said as they settled into their seats, "how long have you been working for Jonathan?" 3 years, Zara replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "And before that?" Jonathan recognized the interrogation for what it was, a polite but thorough vetting designed to establish Zara's place in their social hierarchy. He started to intervene, but Zara answered calmly. "I worked for a consulting firm in Chicago after graduate school." "Graduate school?" Mrs. Weatherby leaned forward with interest. "Where did you study?" "Wharton for my MBA, Northwestern for my undergraduate degree." The table fell silent. Jonathan watched his friends' faces cycle through surprise, confusion, and something that looked almost like resentment. In their world, credentials mattered, but they were supposed to come with the right family name, the right connections, the right background. "How impressive," Dr. Hoffman said finally. "And your family, are they in business as well?" Jonathan saw Zara's fingers tighten almost imperceptibly around her champagne flute. This was the question he'd been dreading, the one designed to establish whether she belonged to their world by birth or was merely visiting it by circumstance. "My father was a high school principal," Zara said quietly. "My mother was a nurse. They both worked very hard to give me opportunities they never had." The silence that followed was deafening. Jonathan felt heat rise in his face as he watched his friends process this information. In their world, self-made success was admirable in theory but somehow threatening in practice, especially when it came wrapped in the wrong skin color and gender. "How admirable," Margaret Pemberton said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "It must be quite an adjustment, moving in these circles." "Actually," Zara said, setting down her champagne with deliberate care, "I find that kindness and intelligence translate well across all social circles. Though I'm beginning to wonder if the reverse is also true." The barb was delivered so smoothly that it took a moment for its impact to register. When it did, the temperature at the table seemed to drop several degrees. Jonathan felt a surge of pride mixed with panic. Zara was holding her own, more than holding her own, but he could see the cost in the slight tension around her eyes, the careful control of her breathing. She was magnificent, but she was also isolated, facing down a table full of people who had decided she didn't belong before she'd even sat down. "Perhaps," he said, his voice cutting through the uncomfortable silence, We should focus on why we're all here tonight. The foundation raised over $2 million this year for literacy programs. It was a transparent attempt to change the subject, and everyone knew it. The conversation shifted to safer topics: charity work, upcoming social events, mutual acquaintances, but the damage was done. Jonathan could feel Zara withdrawing beside him, her responses becoming more polite and less engaged. As the first course was served, he leaned closer to her. "We can leave," he whispered. "Right now. We don't have to stay." Zara turned to look at him, and for a moment her careful composure slipped. He saw hurt in her eyes, and disappointment, but also something else: determination. "No," she said softly. "We stay. I won't give them the satisfaction of running me off." But even as she spoke, Jonathan could see her building walls, protecting herself from further assault. The woman who had descended those museum steps like a queen was still there, but she was retreating behind layers of professional politeness and careful distance. He had brought her into his world, and his world was trying to destroy her. The realization made him feel sick with shame and helpless with rage. The dinner progressed with the mechanical precision of a well-orchestrated performance. Conversations flowed around safe topics: the weather, upcoming charity events, the latest Broadway shows, while underneath, tension simmered like water about to boil. Jonathan found himself watching Zara more than participating in the discussions, noting how she maintained perfect posture despite the subtle hostility surrounding her. "The salmon is excellent," Dr. Hoffman commented, making what seemed like the 20th attempt at neutral conversation. "The chef is from Lou Bernardine," Margaret Pemberton added. "We specifically requested him for tonight's event." Zara nodded politely, cutting her fish into precise pieces she barely touched. Jonathan noticed she'd eaten almost nothing, though she'd graciously complimented each course. The champagne in her glass remained largely untouched as well. "Zara," Charles Pemberton said suddenly, "Jonathan mentioned you speak 4 languages. How fascinating." "Which ones?" "English, Spanish, French, and Mandarin," she replied. "Mandarin!" Mrs. Weatherby exclaimed with exaggerated surprise. "How exotic! However did you learn that?" "I spent a summer in Beijing during graduate school," Zara said evenly. "I was researching emerging markets for my thesis." "A thesis," Bradley Chen repeated, as if the concept were foreign. "On what topic?" "Economic development patterns in post-colonial African nations and their implications for international investment strategies." The silence that followed was profound. Jonathan watched his friends' faces as they processed not just Zara's words, but the casual intelligence with which she delivered them. This wasn't the response they'd expected from someone they dismissed as the help. "How academic," Vivian Ashworth said finally, having appeared at their table during the conversation. "Though I suppose theoretical knowledge is quite different from practical experience in these matters." Jonathan felt his temper flare. Zara has plenty of practical experience. She's been instrumental in our expansion into African markets. The Lagos project alone. "Jonathan." Zara's voice was quiet but firm. "It's all right." But it wasn't all right. Nothing about this evening was all right. Jonathan watched as his friends, people he'd known for decades, systematically tried to diminish and dismiss the most remarkable woman he'd ever met. Their behavior was revealing ugly truths about his social circle that he'd been willfully blind to for years. The evening's program began with speeches from various board members. Jonathan was scheduled to speak last, but as the presentations droned on, he found himself increasingly distracted by Zara's stillness beside him. She applauded at appropriate moments and smiled when spoken to, but he could see her withdrawing further with each passing minute. During a particularly long-winded speech about the Foundation's impact on rural education, the lights dimmed for a video presentation. In the darkness, Jonathan felt Zara's hand brush against his on the table. The contact was brief, possibly accidental, but it sent electricity through him. "Are you all right?" he whispered. She turned toward him in the darkness, and even in the dim light from the projection screen, He could see the strain in her expression. "I'm fine," she whispered back, but her voice carried a tremor that belied her words. "We're leaving. After my speech, we're leaving." "Jonathan, no. You can't leave your own event. Watch me." The video ended, and the lights came up for Jonathan's speech. He rose from his chair, acutely aware of every eye in the room following his movement. As he walked to the podium, he caught fragments of whispered conversations that made his blood boil. Quite the statement he's making. Always was rebellious, but this. What will his mother say? Jonathan reached the podium and looked out over the sea of faces. People who had been part of his life since childhood, who had attended his birthday parties and graduation ceremonies, who had offered condolences at his father's funeral. People he had considered friends. "Good evening," he began, his prepared remarks forgotten. 3 years ago, I hired an executive assistant who has since become one of the most valuable members of my team. She has an MBA from Wharton, speaks 4 languages, and has been instrumental in expanding our company's global reach. She's intelligent, dedicated, and possesses more grace and dignity than anyone in this room. A murmur rippled through the audience. This wasn't the speech they'd expected. Tonight, I brought her here as my guest, hoping to share with her an evening that represents the best of what our community can offer. Instead, I've watched as people I've known my entire life have treated her with barely concealed contempt, not because of anything she's done or said, but because of who she is and where she comes from. The murmur grew louder, uncomfortable shifting in seats, but Jonathan pressed on. The Whitmore Foundation exists to provide educational opportunities to those who might not otherwise have them. We pride ourselves on recognizing potential regardless of background. Yet tonight, I've seen that our commitment to these ideals extends only as far as our checkbooks, not to our dinner tables. He found Zara in the crowd, sitting perfectly still while conversations buzzed around her. Their eyes met across the room, and he saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten. Not just hurt, but a kind of resigned understanding that broke his heart. "I'm proud to be here with Zara Johnson tonight. I'm proud to call her my colleague, my friend, and I hope, something more. If that makes some of you uncomfortable, I suggest you examine why." Jonathan left the podium without the customary closing remarks about donations or upcoming events. The applause that followed was scattered and uncertain. As he made his way back to the table, he could feel the weight of shocked stares and whispered conversations. "That was quite a speech," Dr. Hoffman said as he sat down, her tone carefully neutral. "It was honest," Jonathan replied. "Perhaps too honest," Charles Pemberton muttered. "There's a time and place for everything, Jonathan." "You're right," Jonathan said, standing again and extending his hand to Zara. "And this isn't the place for us." Zara looked up at him, surprise flickering across her features. "Jonathan, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." His voice was firm but gentle. "Dance with me. One dance, and then we leave." The string quartet had begun playing again, and a few couples were moving onto the small dance floor. Zara hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his. As they walked to the dance floor, Jonathan was acutely aware of every eye following them. The conversations around them had shifted from whispers to barely concealed stares. He pulled Zara into his arms, and for the first time all evening, she seemed to relax slightly. "I'm sorry," he said as they began to move to the music. "I'm so sorry for all of this." "You have nothing to apologize for," she replied, but her voice was tired. "You didn't make them who they are. I enabled them. I've been part of this world for so long, I stopped seeing how ugly it could be." They danced in silence for a moment, and Jonathan found himself memorizing everything about this moment. The way she felt in his arms, the scent of her perfume, the graceful way she moved despite the hostile audience surrounding them. "Your speech," she said finally. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. I should have done it the moment we walked in here." "And what happens now?" "Tomorrow, when you have to work with these people, do business with them." It was a practical question, the kind of forward thinking that made her so valuable in business. But Jonathan realized he didn't care about the practical implications. Then I'll find new people to work with. Better people. Zara looked up at him, searching his face. You can't rebuild your entire life because of one evening. I'm not rebuilding my life because of one evening, he said, pulling her slightly closer. I'm rebuilding it because of you. The words hung between them, more honest than he'd intended. Around them, the music continued, but Jonathan felt as if they were dancing in their own private world, insulated from the judgment and hostility that surrounded them. Jonathan, Zara said softly, and there was something in her voice that made his heart race. Yes. Take me home. The simple request carried layers of meaning that made his breath catch. Not to her home, but to his. Not as his employee, but as something else entirely. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. As the song ended, Jonathan led her off the dance floor. They collected her wrap and his coat without speaking to anyone else, ignoring the stares and whispered comments that followed them to the exit. In the museum's marble foyer, away from the crowd, Zara stopped and turned to face him. Thank you, she said, for defending me, for seeing me, for what? For being the man I hoped you were. Standing there in the soft light of the museum's entrance, with the sounds of the ball fading behind them, Jonathan realized that everything he'd thought he wanted from life had been wrong. Success, social standing, the approval of people who had never really known him. None of it mattered compared to the woman standing before him. Zara, he said, reaching up to touch her face gently. I think I'm falling in love with you. I think, she replied, leaning into his touch, I'm falling in love with you too. The admission hung between them like a bridge across an impossible divide. Outside, the city waited with all its possibilities and complications. But for this moment, in this space between his old life and whatever came next, there was only truth and the promise of something real. Jonathan's penthouse felt different with Zara in it. The spaces that had seemed empty and cold now hummed with warmth and possibility. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights, still wearing the emerald gown that had stopped conversations and challenged assumptions. Can I get you something to drink? Jonathan asked, loosening his bow tie. The formal wear felt like a costume now, a uniform for a life he was beginning to question. Wine would be nice, she said without turning around. Red, if you have it. Jonathan moved to his wine collection, selecting a bottle of Bordeaux he'd been saving for a special occasion. As he opened it, he watched Zara's reflection in the window. She looked smaller somehow, the confidence she'd worn like armor at the ball giving way to something more vulnerable. Here, he said, offering her a glass. Thank you. She accepted the wine but continued staring out at the city. It's beautiful from up here. So peaceful. You can't hear any of the noise, can't see any of the struggle. There was something in her tone that made Jonathan study her more carefully. Is that how you see my life? Peaceful. Zara turned to face him, and in the soft lighting of his living room, he could see exhaustion in her eyes that went deeper than one difficult evening. I see a man who has everything but doesn't seem to enjoy any of it, she said gently. I see someone who's lonely in a room full of people who claim to care about him. The observation was so accurate it made him wince. Is it that obvious? To me, yes. But then, I've been watching you for 3 years. Watching me. Zara moved to his couch, settling into the corner with her wine. You hired me because my resume was impressive, but you kept me because I made you laugh during that first interview. Do you remember what you said? Jonathan sat beside her, careful to maintain some distance. I said you were the first person in months who had talked to me like I was human instead of a bank account. And I said that maybe you needed to spend time with different people. I remember. He'd been struck by her directness, her willingness to challenge him even in a job interview. You were right. Was I? Zara took a sip of wine, her expression thoughtful. Because 3 years later, you're still surrounded by the same people, still going to the same events, still playing the same role. Until tonight. Until tonight, she agreed. What changed? Jonathan considered the question, swirling the wine in his glass. You did. Being with you tonight, seeing how they treated you, how they looked at you. It made me see myself clearly for the first time in years. And what did you see? A coward, he said simply. Someone who's been hiding behind money and status instead of living an authentic life. Zara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. Can I tell you something? About why I really stayed at your company when I had other offers. Please. It wasn't the salary, though that was good. It wasn't the benefits or the prestige of working for Whitmore Industries. She set down her wine glass and turned to face him fully. It was because of what happened during the Henderson acquisition. Jonathan frowned, trying to remember. The Henderson deal had been complex, involving months of negotiations and due diligence. What about it? Do you remember the night we worked until 3 in the morning, going over the environmental impact reports? Vaguely. We ordered Chinese food, and you made that joke about the fortune cookies. That's not what I remember. Zara's voice grew quieter. I remember you stopping in the middle of reviewing a contract to ask me about my family. You wanted to know if I had siblings, what my parents did, whether I missed Chicago. Jonathan did remember now, the way the conversation had shifted from business to personal, how natural it had felt to talk with her about things that mattered. You told me about your father, he said slowly. How he'd worked 2 jobs to put you through college. And you told me about yours. How he'd built the company from nothing, how much pressure you felt to live up to his legacy. Zara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Do you know what struck me about that conversation? What? You were the first wealthy person I'd ever met who seemed to understand that money was a tool, not a measure of worth. You talked about your father's work ethic, his integrity, his commitment to his employees. You never once mentioned his net worth or his social connections. Jonathan felt something shift in his chest. I'd forgotten about that night. I hadn't. I went home that night and called my mother. I told her I thought I was working for a good man, someone who might actually deserve the success he'd inherited. And now, Zara reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. Now I know I was right. What you did tonight, standing up for me, defending me in front of all those people, that took courage. It took too long, Jonathan said, his thumb tracing across her knuckles. I should have shut down their behavior the moment it started. You're not responsible for other people's prejudices, Jonathan. But you are responsible for your own choices. And tonight, you chose to stand with me instead of staying silent. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands linked, the weight of the evening settling between them. Outside, the city continued its restless dance of lights and movement, but inside Jonathan's penthouse, time seemed suspended. Zara, he said finally, what happens now? Tomorrow, when we go back to work, when we have to face the reality of what this means. She squeezed his hand gently. I don't know. But I know I don't want to go back to pretending that what I feel for you is just professional respect. What do you feel for me? Zara looked at him with an expression so open and honest it took his breath away. I feel like I've been waiting my whole life for someone to see me the way you do. Not as a representative of my race or my background or my education level, but as myself. Just Zara. Just Zara, he repeated softly. The most extraordinary woman I've ever met. I'm not extraordinary, Jonathan. I'm just someone who refuses to be made small by other people's limitations. But as he looked at her, brilliant, graceful, strong enough to face down a room full of hostility with dignity intact, Jonathan knew she was wrong. She was extraordinary, and somehow, impossibly, she was here with him. The question was whether he was brave enough to build a life worthy of her. How often do we let other people's expectations keep us from pursuing what truly matters to our hearts? Share with us your experiences and journey in the comments below. The wine had relaxed them both, creating an intimacy that felt both new and familiar. Zara had kicked off her heels and tucked her feet under her on the couch, the formal elegance of the evening giving way to something more natural and comfortable. "Tell me something," Jonathan said, refilling their glasses. "Something I don't know about you." Zara smiled, the first genuinely relaxed expression he'd seen from her all evening. "What would you like to know?" "Anything. Everything." He settled back into the couch, angling his body toward hers. "We've worked together for 3 years, but I feel like I'm just now meeting the real you." "The real me," she mused, swirling the wine in her glass. "Well, the real me is terrified of butterflies." Jonathan laughed, the sound surprising them both. "Butterflies? Really? Completely irrational, I know. But something about the way they flutter, it makes my skin crawl." She shuddered dramatically, making him laugh again. "My mother used to take me to the butterfly conservatory when I was little, thinking it would help me get over it. Instead, I spent the entire visit hiding behind her legs." "That's adorable." "It's ridiculous. I can negotiate million-dollar deals and give presentations to rooms full of executives, but show me a monarch butterfly and I turn into a 5-year-old. Jonathan found himself studying her face as she spoke, noting the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the musical quality of her laugh. "What else?" "I sing in the shower. Badly. My neighbors probably think I'm torturing small animals." "I'd like to hear that sometime." The words slipped out before he could stop them, carrying an implication that made them both pause. The idea of Zara in his shower, singing off-key while steam clouded the glass, was both intimate and domestic in a way that made his chest tighten. "Your turn," she said, her cheeks slightly flushed. "Tell me something I don't know about Jonathan Whitmore." "I wanted to be a teacher," he said without hesitation. "A teacher? History. I loved the stories, the way past events connected to shape the present. I had this romantic notion about inspiring young minds, making a difference in individual lives rather than just moving money around." Zara set down her wine glass, giving him her full attention. "What happened? My father died during my senior year of college. Suddenly, I was the heir to Whitmore Industries, and everyone expected me to step into his shoes. The company needed leadership, employees depended on their jobs, and I was the only one who could provide continuity. So you gave up your dreams." "I told myself I was being responsible, that I could make a bigger impact through the foundation, through corporate philanthropy." Jonathan's voice grew quieter. "But sometimes I wonder if I was just taking the easy path. It's simpler to write checks than to actually engage with people's lives." "Is that what you think you've been doing? Taking the easy path?" Jonathan considered the question. "Tonight, watching you handle those people with such grace while they tried to tear you down, it made me realize how little courage I've shown in my own life. You face real challenges every day, prejudice, assumptions, people who underestimate you, and you do it with dignity. I've been hiding behind privilege and calling it responsibility." Zara reached for his hand again, her touch warm and reassuring. "You're being too hard on yourself. Building a company, maintaining jobs, supporting charitable causes, that matters too." "Does it? Or am I just perpetuating a system that keeps people like you on the outside?" "People like me?" "People who deserve to be in those rooms, at those tables, making those decisions. Instead, I surround myself with people who inherited their positions and their prejudices." Zara was quiet for a moment, her thumb tracing patterns on the back of his hand. "Can I tell you what I see when I look at you?" "Please." "I see someone who's been carrying other people's expectations for so long, he's forgotten what his own dreams look like. But I also see someone who's fundamentally good, who genuinely cares about doing the right thing even when it's difficult." "How can you be sure?" "Because of the little things." The way you remember that Mrs. Patterson in accounting is going through a divorce and always ask how she's doing. The way you insisted on keeping the entire janitorial staff when we moved buildings, even though it would have been cheaper to hire a service. The way you've never once made me feel like my opinions mattered less because I'm your assistant. Jonathan felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. You notice all that? I notice everything about you, she said softly. The way you tap your pen when you're thinking. How you always eat the same lunch on Mondays because you're too busy to decide. The way your whole face changes when you smile. Really smile, not that polite expression you wear for clients. And what do you think when you notice these things? Zara leaned closer, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. I think about how much I want to be the reason for that real smile. I think about what it would be like to know all your secrets, not just the professional ones. I think about falling asleep next to you and waking up to find you watching me with that expression you get sometimes. Like you're seeing something wonderful that no one else notices. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Jonathan felt his heart racing as he looked into her eyes, seeing his own longing reflected there. Zara, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I need you to know something. What I feel for you. It's not just attraction or loneliness or some reaction to tonight's disaster. I've been falling for you for months, maybe longer. Every morning when you bring me coffee, every late night when we work together, every time you challenge me or make me laugh or just look at me like I'm worth your time. I've been falling. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was a coward. Because I thought it was inappropriate, that I was your boss and it would be wrong to put you in that position. Because I was afraid you'd think I was just another wealthy man who saw you as a conquest. Zara shifted closer to him on the couch, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. And now I realize that the inappropriate thing would be pretending these feelings don't exist. That treating you like you're fragile or incapable of making your own choices is just another form of disrespect. Good, she said, her lips curving into a smile that made his pulse quicken. Because I've been waiting for you to see me as an equal, not just as someone who works for you. You've never been just someone who works for me. You've been the best part of my days for 3 years. Jonathan. Yes. Stop talking and kiss me. He didn't need to be asked twice. Jonathan cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the softness of her skin, the way she leaned into his touch. When their lips met, it was with a tenderness that spoke of months of suppressed longing and careful restraint finally released. The kiss deepened slowly, naturally, as if they had all the time in the world. Zara's hands found their way to his chest, her fingers working at the buttons of his shirt while he traced the elegant line of her neck. Everything about the moment felt inevitable and perfect, the culmination of every shared glance, every moment of connection they'd pretended was purely professional. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jonathan rested his forehead against hers. I don't want this to be just tonight, he said. I don't want this to be something we regret in the morning or pretend never happened. Neither do I, Zara whispered. But you need to understand what you're choosing. Dating me, being with me publicly, it won't be easy. Tonight was just a preview. There will be more comments, more judgment, more people who think you're making a mistake. Let them think what they want. I'm tired of living my life according to other people's opinions. And your business relationships? Your social connections? Some of those people tonight have been in your life since childhood. Jonathan pulled back slightly to look at her fully. Zara, do you want to be with me? Not as my employee, not as someone I'm rebelling against my social circle with, but as the woman I'm falling in love with. Yes, she said without hesitation. But I need to know you're choosing me for the right reasons. The right reasons? Because you love me. Not because I represent some kind of awakening or rebellion. Because you see a future with me, not just an escape from your past. Jonathan took her hands in his, holding them gently. 3 years ago, You walked into my office for an interview and told me I needed to spend time with different people. Tonight, you walked into that ballroom and showed me what courage and dignity look like. Tomorrow, I want to wake up and figure out how to build a life that's worthy of the woman who's been teaching me how to be a better man without even trying. Tears gathered in Zara's eyes, but she was smiling. That's a pretty good reason. Is it good enough? Instead of answering with words, she kissed him again, and this time there was no hesitation, no careful restraint. This time, there was only the promise of something real and lasting and worth fighting for. Outside, the city continued its restless dance, but inside Jonathan's penthouse, two people who had been circling each other for years finally stopped pretending that what they felt was anything less than love. As they held each other in the soft light of his living room, both knew that everything would be different from this moment forward. The challenges would be real, the obstacles significant, but for the first time in either of their lives, they had found something worth facing any storm to protect. Jonathan woke to sunlight streaming through his bedroom windows and the scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen. For a moment, he lay still, savoring the unfamiliar sensation of contentment that filled his chest. Zara was here, in his space, making coffee in his kitchen. The simple domesticity of it felt like a miracle. He found her standing at his kitchen island, still wearing his shirt from the night before, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked up when he entered, and her smile was radiant. "Good morning," she said, offering him a mug. "I hope you don't mind that I made myself at home." "I mind that you're wearing too many clothes," he said, pulling her into his arms and kissing her thoroughly. She laughed against his lips. "Careful, Mr. Whitmore. I might start thinking you're only interested in me for my body." "Among other things," he murmured, nuzzling her neck. "Your mind, your heart, your terrible singing voice." "Hey!" She swatted his chest playfully. "You haven't even heard me sing yet. I'm looking forward to it." They spent the morning in blissful isolation, talking and laughing and learning each other in ways that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or board meetings. Jonathan felt lighter than he had in years, as if some fundamental weight had been lifted from his shoulders. It was nearly noon when his phone began ringing insistently. He ignored it the first 3 times, but when it rang again, Zara nudged him. "You should answer it. It might be important." The caller ID showed his mother's name. Jonathan's stomach clenched as he accepted the call. "Hello, Mother." "Jonathan." Victoria Whitmore's voice was ice-cold. "I think you'd better come over. We need to talk. I'm actually busy today." "Now." "Jonathan. This cannot wait." The line went dead. Jonathan stared at his phone, dread pooling in his stomach. "What is it?" Zara asked, reading his expression. "My mother. She wants to see me immediately." "About last night?" "Almost certainly." Jonathan ran a hand through his hair. "I should go deal with this. It won't take long." But even as he said it, he had a sinking feeling that nothing about this conversation would be simple. An hour later, Jonathan sat in his mother's pristine living room, facing the woman who had shaped his understanding of social expectations and proper behavior for 38 years. Victoria Whitmore was elegant and formidable, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "I've been fielding phone calls all morning," she began without preamble. "Vivian Ashworth, Margaret Pemberton, Charles Sinclair. They're all very concerned about your display last night." "My display?" "Don't be obtuse, Jonathan. You brought your secretary to the foundation ball and then gave a speech that essentially accused your oldest friends of racism." "I accused them of nothing. I simply pointed out their behavior." Victoria's expression hardened. "That girl has clearly gotten her hooks into you. I suppose I should have seen this coming. Pretty young women have been manipulating wealthy men since the beginning of time. Her name is Zara, and she's not manipulating anyone." "Isn't she?" "She's your employee, Jonathan. She depends on you for her livelihood. Don't you think that creates a certain incentive for her to be accommodating. The implication hit Jonathan like a physical blow. That's disgusting. It's realistic. You're a wealthy, lonely man, and she's an ambitious young woman who sees an opportunity. I'm sure she's very convincing. Stop. Jonathan's voice was sharp. You don't know her. You don't know anything about her. I know enough. I know she's using you to climb social ladders she has no business climbing. I know she's turned you against people who have been part of your life since childhood. And I know that if you continue down this path, you'll destroy everything your father built. What are you talking about? Victoria moved to her desk and retrieved a tablet, which she handed to him. On the screen was a gossip blog post titled Whitmore's Shocking Choice: Love or Social Suicide? The article was accompanied by photos from the ball, Jonathan and Zara dancing, his speech at the podium, their exit together. The text was a mixture of speculation and thinly veiled racism, questioning Zara's motives and Jonathan's judgment. This is just the beginning, Victoria said as Jonathan read. By tomorrow, it will be in the society pages of every major newspaper. Your business associates are already asking questions. The Pemberton Group is reconsidering their partnership. Bradley Chen called this morning to express his concerns about your decision-making. Jonathan's hands tightened on the tablet. So you're jeopardizing everything for a woman who is clearly using you. Wake up, Jonathan. This infatuation is going to cost you your reputation, your business relationships, and your standing in the community. Maybe those things aren't as important as I thought they were. Don't be naive. Without those relationships, Whitmore Industries will suffer. Without your standing in the community, the foundation's effectiveness will be compromised. How many people will lose their jobs? How many charitable programs will be cut? All because you couldn't keep your personal life separate from your professional responsibilities. The words hit their target with surgical precision. Jonathan felt the familiar weight of obligation settling on his shoulders, the same pressure that had shaped every major decision of his adult life. She's not worth it, Jonathan, Victoria continued, her voice softening slightly. I'm sure she's a lovely girl, but she's not one of us. She doesn't understand our world, our responsibilities. She's asking you to choose between her and everything you've worked to build. She's not asking me to choose anything, isn't she? By being with her publicly, you're forcing that choice. You're putting your personal desires ahead of your duties to the company, to the foundation, to the family name. Jonathan stared at the tablet, at the photos of him and Zara looking happy and in love, now twisted into something sorted by strangers with keyboards and prejudices. What do you want me to do? End it. Quietly, professionally. Give her a generous severance package and help her find another position. Let this blow over. In 6 months, no one will remember any of this happened. And if I don't? Victoria's expression was implacable. Then you'll learn what it costs to put personal gratification ahead of responsibility. And so will everyone who depends on you. Jonathan left his mother's house feeling like he was drowning. The tablet with its poisonous article sat heavy in his hands as he drove back to his penthouse, each traffic light giving him more time to think about Victoria's words. By the time he reached his building, doubt had taken root and begun to grow. Was he being selfish? Was he really willing to risk everything? His business, his employees' livelihoods, the foundation's work, for a relationship that had barely begun? When he walked into his penthouse, Zara was waiting for him, still wearing his shirt, her face bright with anticipation. "How did it go?" she asked, then stopped when she saw his expression. "Jonathan? What's wrong?" He handed her the tablet without speaking, watching as her face changed while she read. When she finished, she set it down carefully and looked at him with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "So," she said quietly, "what happens now?" And Jonathan realized he didn't know. The silence in Jonathan's penthouse stretched between them like a chasm. Zara stood perfectly still, still wearing his shirt, but somehow she seemed to be receding from him with each passing second. The tablet lay on the coffee table between them like evidence in a trial. "Say something," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled. Jonathan ran his hands through his hair, pacing to the windows that had seemed so full of possibility just hours before. Now the city below looked cold and unforgiving. "My mother thinks I should end this," he said without turning around. "She thinks you're using me, that I'm jeopardizing everything for an infatuation." "And what do you think?" The question was simple, but Jonathan found himself unable to answer it. Everything Victoria had said was logical, practical, rooted in the reality of his position and responsibilities. But when he looked at Zara, logic seemed irrelevant. "I think," he said slowly, "that I've never been more confused about anything in my life." Zara nodded as if she'd expected that answer. She moved to the couch and began gathering her things, her dress from the night before, her shoes, her purse. Each item she collected felt like another step away from him. "What are you doing?" "Making this easier for you," she said, her voice steady but distant. "You're right to be confused. This is complicated, and the stakes are high. You need time to think without me here clouding your judgment." "Zara, wait." "No. Jonathan. Your mother is right about one thing. I am your employee. That does create a power imbalance, and it does make this complicated. Maybe we moved too fast, got caught up in the moment." She was putting on her professional mask, the same composed expression she wore in board meetings and client presentations. Jonathan felt panic rising in his chest as he watched her transform back into his executive assistant. "That's not what this is," he said desperately. "Last night, this morning, that wasn't just getting caught up in the moment." "Wasn't it?" Zara paused in her packing, looking at him with eyes that seemed older than they had that morning. "You took me to that ball to prove a point to yourself, to show that you could be different from your friends. And I let you because I wanted to believe that what I felt for you was real, that it was mutual." "It is real. It is mutual. Is it? Or are you just rebelling against a life that's been chosen for you since birth? Because if that's what this is, if I'm just your way of acting out against your mother and your social circle, then we should stop this now before it gets worse." Jonathan stared at her, seeing the hurt she was trying to hide behind professional composure. "You think that's what this is? You think you're just some kind of rebellion? I don't know what to think. Yesterday I was your assistant. Today I'm a scandal in the gossip blogs. Tomorrow I could be unemployed and unemployable if this goes badly. So yes, I'm questioning everything." The practical reality of her situation hit him like a physical blow. She was right. She had far more to lose than he did. If this relationship destroyed his reputation, he would still be wealthy, still have options. If it destroyed hers, she could lose everything she'd worked for. "I would never let that happen to you," he said. "You might not have a choice. You read that article. This is just the beginning. There will be more stories, more speculation, more people questioning my motives and your judgment. Can you honestly tell me you're prepared for that? That you're willing to fight that battle every day for as long as we're together?" Jonathan wanted to say yes immediately, to declare that he would fight the world for her if necessary. But the words stuck in his throat as he thought about the phone calls his mother had mentioned, the business relationships already under strain, the foundation's work potentially compromised. "I see," Zara said, reading his hesitation correctly. "You're not sure. It's not that simple." "It is that simple, Jonathan. Either you believe what we have is worth fighting for, or you don't. Either you're willing to choose love over convenience, or you're not." She finished packing and stood, holding her dress and shoes, looking elegant and dignified even in his oversized shirt. "I'm going to go home and give you space to figure out what you really want. When you decide, you know where to find me. Zara, please, don't leave like this." She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "I love you, Jonathan. I think I have for a long time. But I won't be someone's guilty secret or their act of rebellion. I won't be the woman you're with in private but ashamed of in public. I deserve better than that. You do deserve better. You deserve everything. Then prove it. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like finality. Jonathan stood alone in his penthouse, surrounded by the remnants of their perfect morning. 2 coffee cups on the counter, rumpled sheets in his bedroom, the lingering scent of her perfume in the air. He picked up the tablet and read the article again, each word feeling like a small cut. The photos showed them looking happy, in love, completely absorbed in each other. But the text painted a different picture. A naive wealthy man being manipulated by an opportunistic employee, a scandal that would rock New York's elite social circles. Jonathan set the tablet down and walked to his office, where framed photos lined the shelves, him with his father at various company events, with his mother at charity galas, with the friends who had treated Zara so cruelly the night before. A lifetime of relationships built on shared privilege and unexamined assumptions. His phone rang. Bradley Chen. "Jonathan, we need to talk," Bradley said without preamble. "The Pemberton Group is having second thoughts about the merger. They're concerned about recent developments." "Recent developments? Come on, man. You know what I'm talking about. That stunt you pulled last night has people questioning your judgment. Margaret Pemberton called it deeply concerning behavior from someone in your position." Jonathan felt anger flare in his chest. "My personal life is not the Pemberton Group's concern. It is when it affects business relationships. Look, I get it. She's attractive, and maybe you were feeling rebellious. But you need to think about the bigger picture here. This merger represents hundreds of jobs, millions in revenue. Are you really going to jeopardize all of that for whatever this is? This is me falling in love with an extraordinary woman." "Jonathan." Bradley's voice carried the patronizing tone of someone explaining something obvious to a child. "She works for you. She's your employee. Don't you see how this looks? How it compromises your position?" "The only thing that compromises my position is surrounding myself with people who judge others based on their race and social status. That's not what this is about, and you know it. This is about appropriate professional boundaries, about maintaining the respect and confidence of your peers and business partners." After Bradley hung up, Jonathan's phone continued to ring. Charles Pemberton, expressing concern about Jonathan's recent behavior. Dr. Hoffman, suggesting he might benefit from talking to someone about his recent choices. Vivian Ashworth, offering to introduce him to more suitable women from better families. Each conversation felt like another weight added to his shoulders, another voice telling him that choosing Zara meant choosing isolation, financial risk, professional suicide. By evening, Jonathan sat alone in his office, staring at a resignation letter that had been delivered by courier an hour earlier. Zara's handwriting was precise and professional. "Dear Mr. Whitmore, please accept this letter as my formal resignation from my position as executive assistant, effective immediately. I believe this decision is in the best interests of both Whitmore Industries and myself. Thank you for the opportunities you have provided me over the past 3 years. I wish you and the company continued success. Sincerely, Zara Johnson." No mention of the night before, no reference to their relationship, no emotion at all. Just a clean, professional severance that protected them both from further scandal. Jonathan crumpled the letter and threw it across the room, then immediately retrieved it and smoothed it out. Even in leaving, she was protecting him, giving him an easy way out of the mess his feelings had created. His mother had been right. Zara was making it simple for him. He could accept her resignation, let the gossip die down, return to his comfortable, empty life surrounded by people who valued his money more than his character. Or he could fight. Jonathan looked around his office at the trappings of success that suddenly felt like prison bars. The awards and accolades, the photos with people who had shown their true colors the moment he'd stepped outside their narrow definition of acceptable behavior, the symbols of a life built on other people's expectations rather than his own choices. He thought about Zara's words. Either you believe what we have is worth fighting for, or you don't. He thought about the way she'd looked at him that morning, with love and hope and trust that he'd proven himself unworthy of. He thought about his father, who had built Whitmore Industries not by following other people's rules, but by having the courage to forge his own path. And finally, Jonathan knew what he had to do. He picked up his phone and began making calls, not to apologize or explain, but to make it clear that anyone who had a problem with his personal choices was welcome to take their business elsewhere. He called his lawyer to discuss restructuring his business relationships. He called his accountant to review which partnerships were truly essential and which were simply convenient. Most importantly, he called his assistant, his former assistant, but the call went straight to voicemail. "Zara," he said after the beep, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for another chance. Not as your boss, not as someone who's confused about what he wants, but as a man who's finally figured out that nothing in his life matters if you're not in it. I love you. I choose you. And I'm going to spend however long it takes proving that to you." He hung up and stared out at the city lights, no longer seeing isolation but possibility. Tomorrow, he would begin the work of rebuilding his life around what actually mattered. Tonight, he would figure out how to win back the woman who had shown him what love really looked like. The choice, finally, had been easy. Everything else would be the hard part. 3 weeks later, Zara stood in her small apartment, packing the last of her belongings into boxes. The job offer from Morrison & Associates was generous. A senior consulting position with a significant salary increase and the chance to work on international development projects. It was everything she'd worked toward, a fresh start away from the complications of her feelings for Jonathan Whitmore. She hadn't spoken to him since the morning she'd left his penthouse, though he'd called every day for the first week. His voicemails had evolved from desperate pleas to simple statements of love, and finally to updates about changes he was making in his life. She'd listened to each one, but hadn't found the courage to call back. The gossip had died down faster than she'd expected. New scandals had captured the media's attention, and without any public appearances together, the story had faded. Zara had received a generous severance package and glowing references that had made finding new employment surprisingly easy. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt hollow. A knock at her door interrupted her packing. Zara opened it to find a delivery man holding an enormous bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite, though she'd never told Jonathan that. The card was simple. For someone who brings light to every room she enters. J. It was the 15th bouquet in 3 weeks, each one different, each one somehow perfectly suited to her tastes. Roses the color of sunset. Peonies in soft pink. Wildflowers that looked like they'd been picked from a meadow. Never the expected dozen red roses, but always something that showed he'd been paying attention to who she really was. Zara set the sunflowers on her kitchen counter and returned to packing, trying to ignore the way they brightened her entire apartment. Another knock came an hour later. This time it was Mrs. Chen from down the hall, holding a covered dish. "From the young man," she said with a knowing smile. "He said you might be too busy packing to cook." The dish contained her favorite Thai curry from a restaurant she'd mentioned once in passing. Zara stared at it, remembering the conversation. They'd been working late on the Henderson acquisition, and she'd mentioned craving comfort food from home. Her phone buzzed with a text. "I know you're leaving tomorrow. I know you probably don't want to see me, but I have something that belongs to you." Zara stared at the message for a long time before responding. "What?" "Your heart. I've been carrying it around for 3 weeks, and I think it's time I returned it in person." Despite everything, Zara found herself smiling. Even in heartbreak, Jonathan could make her laugh. "That's a terrible line. I know. I'm out of practice with romance. I could use a good teacher." Zara's fingers hovered over her phone. She was leaving for Chicago in the morning, starting fresh, putting this entire chapter of her life behind her. The smart thing would be to ignore his message, finish packing, and move on. Instead, she typed, 1 hour. The coffee shop on the corner. The coffee shop was nearly empty when Zara arrived. Jonathan sat at a corner table, looking different than she'd ever seen him. Gone was the perfectly tailored suit, replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. His hair was slightly mussed, and there were shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd been sleeping as poorly as she had. He stood when he saw her, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the small space. "You came," he said finally. "You said you had something of mine." Jonathan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Zara's breath caught. "It's not what you think," he said quickly, seeing her expression. "I mean, it is, but not yet. Not unless you want it to be." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold necklace with a small pendant, a butterfly with wings made of tiny diamonds. "You said you were afraid of butterflies," he said softly. "I thought maybe if you had one that was beautiful instead of fluttery, it might help." Zara stared at the necklace, her throat tight with emotion. "Jonathan, I know you're leaving tomorrow. I know I hurt you, that I let you down when you needed me to be brave. But I need you to know that everything has changed." "What do you mean?" Jonathan sat down, gesturing for her to join him. "I mean I've spent the last 3 weeks rebuilding my life. I ended the partnership with the Pemberton Group. I resigned from 3 boards whose members made it clear they had a problem with my choices. I fired Bradley Chen as my financial advisor." Zara's eyes widened. "Jonathan, you can't restructure your entire life because of you." "Yes, I can. Because you were right. I was surrounding myself with people who didn't deserve my loyalty or respect. People who judged others based on prejudice and privilege instead of character." "And your mother?" "My mother and I had a very frank conversation about respect and boundaries. She's adjusting to the new reality." Zara studied his face, seeing something different there, a piece she'd never noticed before, as if he'd finally stopped fighting against himself. "The foundation is doing better than ever," he continued. "Turns out there are a lot of people who were waiting for someone to take a stand against the old guard's exclusivity. We've formed new partnerships, brought in fresh perspectives. The literacy program you suggested? We're implementing it in 12 cities. That's wonderful, but—" "I'm not telling you this to convince you to stay," Jonathan said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I'm telling you because I want you to know that loving you didn't destroy my life. It saved it. You showed me what it means to live with integrity, to choose what's right over what's easy." Zara felt tears gathering in her eyes. "Why are you telling me this now?" "I'm leaving in the morning. Because I love you. Because I want you to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include me. Because you deserve to know that what we had was real, that it mattered, that it changed everything." He lifted the necklace from the box. "May I?" Zara nodded, turning so he could fasten it around her neck. His fingers were gentle against her skin, and she closed her eyes at the familiar touch. "There's something else," he said as she turned back to face him. "Morrison and Associates called me yesterday." "What? Why?" "They wanted a reference for their new senior consultant. I told them they were getting the most brilliant, dedicated, and principled person I've ever had the privilege of working with." Jonathan smiled. "I also told them that if they didn't treat you with the respect you deserve, they'd answer to me." "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. Because even if you never forgive me, even if you build a wonderful life in Chicago without me, I want to make sure the world knows how extraordinary you are." Zara touched the butterfly pendant, feeling its delicate weight against her throat. "Jonathan, I know you have to go. I know I lost my chance. But I needed you to know that you were right. Love is worth fighting for. I just figured it out too late." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Finally, Zara spoke. "What if it's not too late?" Jonathan's head snapped up, hope flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "What if I told you that I've been miserable for 3 weeks? That I've listened to every voicemail, kept every flower, and spent every night wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life by walking away. I'd say that Morrison and Associates might need to find another senior consultant. Zara laughed, the sound bright and genuine. I'd say you might be right. Jonathan reached for her hands, holding them gently. Zara, I can't promise it will be easy. There will still be people who don't understand, who judge us, who think we don't belong together. But I can promise that I will never again let other people's opinions matter more than what we have. And what do we have? Everything, he said simply. We have everything. Zara looked into his eyes and saw her future there. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and honest and full of love. She thought about the job in Chicago, the fresh start she'd planned, the safe path that would keep her heart protected. Then she thought about the man sitting across from her, who had risked everything to become worthy of her love, who had chosen courage over comfort and authenticity over approval. I love you too, she said, and watched his face transform with joy. I choose you too. When Jonathan kissed her in that small coffee shop, with a butterfly necklace catching the light and the promise of tomorrow stretching before them, Zara knew she was exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, at their engagement party, a small gathering of people who loved them for who they were rather than what they represented, Jonathan would give another speech. This time, he would talk about the courage to choose love over convention, about the woman who had taught him that the best life was an authentic one, and about the butterfly that had learned to fly. But that night in the coffee shop, with the city lights twinkling outside and their hands intertwined across the small table, they simply held each other and marveled at the miracle of second chances and the power of love to transform everything it touches. What would change in your life if you chose to follow your heart instead of others' expectations? Share with us in the comments below and make sure you subscribe for more wonderful stories like this.